I've been alive a long time. Long enough that the years stopped being a straight line for me and became something more like a pile. Weight without order, faces without dates, wars without endings. I used to think that was the worst thing about being what I am. I was wrong. The worst thing is watching everyone around you run out of time while you keep going. The worst thing is being the last man, standing in a room that used to be full. By the time they asked me to go back, there weren't many rooms left. The monastery sat on a ridge in what had once been China. I say had once been, not because China was gone. The land was still there, the mountains still there. But because the thing that makes a place, the people, and the noise and the ordinary human chaos of being alive, most of that was ash. The Sentinels had seen to it, methodically, the way a machine sees to things. No anger in the process, no cruelty in the old human sense. Just a program executing toward completion. We had been running for months by then, the remnants of us. 12 people. That number is important. 12. From a world that had once housed tens of thousands of people like us, and beyond us, billions of ordinary people who'd gotten caught in the gears of something they hadn't designed and couldn't stop. 12 of us in a monastery high enough that the air tasted thin, and most days, the Sentinels didn't come above the cloud line. Days, Kate had been keeping us alive. Not through force. Kate was small and quiet, and had the kind of stillness about her that gets misread as fragility until you understand what it actually is. She could reach back through time and touch someone, and send their mind backward through the years. Days, weeks, sometimes a month. Enough that a wrong decision could be unmade. Enough that a convoy that had been ambushed could be rerouted before it moved. She'd been spending herself doing it. Every transit cost her something. She was careful not to show how much. I found her in the monastery's upper hall, standing at a table where the maps used to mean something. She looked up when I came in, and there was something in her face I recognized. The face of someone who's arrived at a decision they've been avoiding. How long, I asked. Days, she said. Maybe less. They've triangulated our position from 3 attack vectors. We've been rerouting, but they learn. They always learn. She paused. We've run out of short-range options. The others were assembling. I could hear them in the main hall below. The particular sound of people who move through dangerous spaces, quiet and deliberate, no wasted motion, whose hands could drop the temperature of a room in seconds. Blink, who folded space and made doors in the air. Warpath, who could feel the ground through the soles of his boots and knew what was coming before it arrived. Bishop, who carried 50 years of survival in his eyes and spoke only when it was worth the breath. Others, each of them extraordinary, each of them running out of time. Charles was in the main hall. He arrived in his chair, one of the last working chairs, maintained by Hank's obsessive care, and he moved to the head of the table the way a man moves when he's been doing it his whole life, and the habit remains even when the world around the habit has changed entirely. Eric stood at his shoulder. They rarely let much space develop between them anymore. Old enemies who'd settled into something more complicated and more useful, bound by the scale of what they faced. Sit down, Logan, Charles said. I sat. He explained it clearly. The way he always explained things clearly. With the precision of someone who knows that understanding is the first casualty of panic, and who has spent his life fighting to preserve it. The Sentinel program had been running for 50 years. 50 years of adaptive evolution, mechanical generation building on mechanical generation. Each model learning from the last. The machines had started as a targeted tool. They had become a comprehensive one. The distinction between mutant and human accomplice had eroded. The distinction between accomplice and bystander had eroded after that. What remained was a program optimized for a conclusion, and the conclusion was us. There is one point of origin, Charles said. One moment, in 1973, where the chain begins. A woman named Raven was captured by government forces. Biology, her genetic adaptability, was used to build the adaptive architecture that makes the Sentinels what they are. If she is never captured, if that moment is changed, the machines never become what they become. We've been through this, Eric said quietly, not dismissively, carefully. Voice of someone who's turned a problem over many times and still hasn't found the seam in it. Transit range Kate has been working with is not the range we need, Kate said. I know. A pause. She was standing at the edge of the room. I noticed, not for the first time, how she positioned herself. Always near a wall. Always with a line to the door. A tactical instinct that had been learned. 50 years is a different calculation than 50 days. The strain on a human mind during transit scales with distance. I can do it. I've run the numbers. But the person I send can't be someone ordinary. Transit itself will break a normal mind at the seams. Everyone looked at me. I looked back. You heal, Eric said. Simply, stating the equation. Whatever the journey breaks, Kate said, your body will repair, probably. We believe probably. Probably, I said. It's the best word available. I thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not long. The alternative was watching the monastery fall in the next few days. The alternative was 12 people, and the last remnant of something worth preserving, getting extinguished by machines that had no concept of what they were ending. I'd lived through a great deal of things I hadn't chosen. This I could choose. Walk me through what I'm doing, I said. The briefing lasted an hour. Charles did most of it, with Eric contributing details about the specific conditions of 1973 in a tone that suggested he'd had considerable time to think about that year and had done so reluctantly. The plan was this. I would arrive in 1973 in my own body, younger then, the version that existed in that year. I would need to find Charles, the 1973 version, and convince him to help. I would need to reach Raven before she made her move. And here was the part that complicated everything. We would need Eric. You, I said, looking at him. The version of me that exists in 1973, he said, with a perfectly level expression, is in a containment cell beneath the Pentagon. Crete walls, plastic restraints, no accessible metal within 50 meters. They built it specifically to hold me. He considered this with the equanimity of a man regarding a chess position. You'll need to extract me. Of course I will. You'll also need help doing it. Someone fast enough to operate inside a government facility. Someone whose speed exceeds the reaction time of every security measure in the building. You have someone in mind. A name came to us through other channels. A young man in Washington. A boy, really. He looked faintly uncomfortable, which for Eric was significant. He's young, extraordinarily irritating. But what he can do is not replicable by any other means. Name, I said. Peter. Charles ran me through what I needed to understand about the 1973 version of himself. He was unsentimental about it, in the way that people are unsentimental when they've had time to fully reckon with who they used to be. He had been 29 years old, and in the process of losing what he'd spent his early life building. The school he'd founded. The place where young people with abilities that frightened the ordinary world had come to learn that those abilities were not a disease, had been emptied. His closest collaborators had been scattered or taken by circumstances he'd had no control over. The dream, as he'd articulated it, was intact. His relationship with it was not. He was managing with chemical assistance the particular problem of having a mind that reaches into other minds, whether invited or not. Without the medication he'd developed, the voices were unmanageable. With it, they were silent. The silence was livable. It was also, he told me, a kind of slow erasure. You stop feeling what others feel, and eventually you stop knowing why it matters that you do. He's not going to want to listen to a stranger, Charles said. I've gotten people to listen to me before. Not him. Not in that state. You'll need to give him something he can't rationalize away. A pause. Show him what you are. Let him try to read you. Depth of what you've lived, what you carry. That's harder to dismiss than words. You're saying overwhelm him with the evidence. I'm saying let him feel that you're telling the truth. That's all I'm saying. Kate had me lie down on a low cot in the center of the hall. The others stepped back. There was a quality to the room then that I recognized from certain military operations I'd been part of. The particular solemnity of people who understand that what's about to happen matters, who have done everything they can do and are now watching someone else carry the thing forward. No one said anything unnecessary. I appreciated that. Kate sat behind me. She placed her hands on either side of my head. Her hands were steadier than they should have been, given what she was about to do. Don't fight the disorientation, she said. Your instinct will be to resist it. That's the thing most likely to cause damage. Let it move through you. Understood, I said. Yeah. Come back. Plan to, I said. Then she sent me back 50 years in the space of a breath. I won't pretend I can describe it accurately. I have tried in the years since, and the words don't bend the right way. It was not like falling, and it was not like sleeping, and it was not like pain, though it had elements of all three. It was more like being taken apart by something enormous and indifferent, and understanding, while it happened, that the parts would be reassembled on the other end. Probably did a lot of work. Every year I'd lived was somewhere in the experience, dense and disordered. Everything layered on, everything else, without the mercy of sequence. And then it stopped. 1973 hit me like a physical fact. The smell of it first. Cigarettes and frying oil and exhaust, and something floral on a woman passing in the hall outside. The weight of the air, thicker, warmer. The sounds. A television in another room, someone's radio, the street noise of a city that didn't yet know what was coming. I was in a bed in an apartment in New York, and I had no immediate idea how I'd gotten there, which was a problem I resolved in the next several minutes with some creativity. A woman with sharp opinions and fast reflexes. A window I didn't use, a door I did. The city receiving me like it receives everyone, without particular interest, which is the best you can ask for from a city. I found a telephone directory and a payphone and the address I needed. The Xavier estate was outside the city. Borrowed a car. Borrowed is generous. I located a car whose owner was not present and drove it, with the intention of making things right later, which is a moral compromise I've made before, under comparable circumstances. The gate at the estate was rusted in the open position. The hedges had been let go. The windows of the house reflected the morning, light warmth, without warmth way. Windows do when nobody's been lighting the rooms from inside. I went in through the front door. It was unlocked, which I found out by knocking twice, and then trying the handle, because if there's a door, I try the handle before I do anything more dramatic. Old habit. The interior of the house was lived in but not inhabited. The difference matters. Lived in means someone is there, going through motions, maintaining enough to get through the days. Inhabited means someone has claimed the space, made it theirs, filled it with the accumulated evidence of a life being actively pursued. This house was the former. Someone sleeping there, eating there, not much else. I found him on the second floor, in a study with good bookshelves, and a desk that had once been used for serious work, and was currently being used to support a decanter, and a glass, and the elbow of a man, not particularly interested in being found. He looked up when I came in, and I got my first look at the younger version of the man I'd known for decades. He was recognizably the same. The bones of the face, the quality of intelligence in the eyes, even the posture. Slightly forward-leaning. The posture of someone who grew up comfortable, but learned to lean into conversations. But there was something absent that the older Charles carried like a permanent feature, something I didn't have a word for immediately, and then found one. Conviction. The older man's conviction was quiet and unperformative and essentially unshakable. This man's was somewhere he couldn't reach. "I don't know you," he said. "No," I agreed. "You're going to." I sat down. He watched me with the wariness of someone who knows he should ask me to leave and also knows he doesn't have the energy for the argument. "My name is Logan. I need about an hour of your time. As if you're willing to do the thing you do, the reading, the mind thing, and verify for yourself that I'm not lying." A long pause, picked up his glass, looked at it, set it back down. "What mind thing?" he said. "The one where you know what other people are thinking. The one you've been chemically preventing for." I looked at him. 2 years? Somewhere around there. He looked at me with the first real attention he'd given me since I walked in. "That's a very specific thing to say to a stranger," he said. "I'm not a stranger. I'm just someone you haven't met yet." I leaned forward. "Try it. Read me. Whatever you find there, whatever you see when you look at what I've lived, take that as the evidence. I'll wait." For a moment I thought he was going to tell me to leave. The decision moved across his face with visible effort, and then, with the particular carefulness of someone picking up something fragile, he reached out and stopped. "Telling the truth," he said quietly. "Yes. You're from..." He stopped again, pressed his lips together. The expression of someone working through something that doesn't fit into existing categories. That's not possible. A lot of what I'm going to tell you isn't possible. That doesn't make it not true. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called Hank McCoy. Big, blue, impossibly gentle for someone with those proportions, with a mind that operated at a speed and depth that still occasionally surprised me, despite everything I knew about him. He'd been maintaining the house and the equipment alone, a one-man caretaking operation for a dream that had been put on hold. He came into the study and looked at me with the precise evaluative gaze of a scientist encountering a new data point, cross-referenced it against whatever Charles had communicated to him before calling, and extended his hand. "Hank McCoy," he said. "I'd offer you coffee, but I'm not sure this house has any." "That's fine," I said. "Sit down." I told them everything. I want you to understand what that means. I told them the whole thing. It's the Sentinels, the 50-year arc, what the machines became and why. Raven's capture and what was done with her biology, the way her gift was reverse engineered into a mechanical program that learned from every mutant it encountered and turned that learning against the next one. The monastery, Kate. 12 people making a last decision at the top of a mountain. Charles went very still when I got to Raven. He had the look of a man hearing something confirmed that he'd feared. Not the blank shock of new information. Something older. Particularness of someone who loved someone and lost them, and has been carrying the weight of what the loss means without being able to fully calculate it. "She thinks killing Trask saves everyone," I said. "Yes," Charles said, "she would." A pause. "She's not wrong about what Trask is. She's wrong about what his death produces. His death produces a martyr and a program with a face on it. Capture produces the program's engine." I let that sit. "She's wrong about the mechanism. She's right that it has to be stopped." "Can we stop her?" Hank asked, practically, already thinking about logistics. "We can try," I said, "but we can't do it without Eric." The silence that followed had texture, particular texture of a room in which one name has detonated. "Eric," Charles said. Not a question. Not really an exclamation. Just the name, held in the air, examined. "He's in the Pentagon, underground facility. I need him out before we can get to Paris in time. And getting him out requires someone faster than any security measure built in 1973. "You have someone in mind," Hank said. "I have a name, Peter. He's in Washington, I tried to find the right word. He's a lot." We drove to Washington that afternoon, the three of us in the estate's one operational vehicle, which Hank had restored to functionality with the focused dedication he brought to anything mechanical. Charles sat in the back. He was quieter than he'd been at the estate, which was already quiet, and I understood he was processing the conversation with Eric's name in it, working through the geometry of what he felt about that. Peter's mother answered the door. She had the expression of a woman who had spent years developing patience with a teenager whose relationship with the physical world was not governed by normal rules, and who had made peace with it by treating nearly everything with the same mild equanimity. She directed us downstairs, which was Peter's domain. He was sitting on a couch, eating at a speed that suggested the cereal was not keeping up with him. He was wearing a silver jacket. He looked up at us with the particular expression of a teenager confronted with unexpected adults. A blend of wariness and aggressive boredom, and then something shifted in his eyes. That same shift I'd seen in Charles. The recognition that something real was being presented. "I'm not in trouble," he said immediately. "Not from me," I said. "I need your help." He put down the cereal. He looked at us more carefully. 17, maybe 18, with the body of someone who's been moving fast since he could walk. Lean in that particular way, as though the muscles have been refined by years of operating at a different speed than the world around them. "What kind of help?" he said, carefully. Not dismissive. Checking. "We need someone inside a building who can move faster than any security system built in the last 10 years and not be touched while doing it." He tilted his head. "Be specific," he said. "I'm a pretty specific kind of person." He showed us what he could do in the back hallway, because he wanted to see what we did when we saw it. I've learned over the years that people with significant abilities often test strangers with those abilities early. It's a reasonable form of screening, separating the people who can handle the reality from the ones who can't. He moved from one end of the hall to the other, and back between blinks. And when he returned, he was eating another piece of cereal, and there were 4 pens in his hand that had been in our pockets. Charles was smiling for the first time since I'd arrived. "How fast?" Hank asked scientifically. Peter shrugged in a way that managed to convey both genuine uncertainty and mild pride. "Faster than that," he said, pointing at a ceiling fan. Then, after a moment, "Okay, what's the job?" The Pentagon, as it turned out, was not the impenetrable institution it advertised itself as when you had Peter with you. I want to be clear that what we did was deeply illegal by any framework, and I retain some residual discomfort about it, and I am also clear-eyed enough to acknowledge that the scale of what was at stake made the calculus straightforward. We went in through a maintenance entrance that Hank had identified from architectural plans, obtained through channels I won't detail. The security on the upper levels was navigable. The deeper levels were something else. The kitchen corridor was the problem. A guard rotation that overlapped in a way that left no clean window. Movement sensors. A door mechanism that required simultaneous physical and electronic input. In any conventional operation, you wait for a gap. There was no gap. Peter looked at the situation for about 10 seconds. He had the focused calm of someone for whom a problem of this type is not intimidating but interesting. The way a complicated lock is interesting, to a man who's been picking locks his whole life. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. What happened in the next 30 seconds, I can describe in retrospect, but did not observe in real time, because real time was not the time Peter was operating in. There was a moment of stillness. Then a guard was in a different position than he'd been. Then 2 guards were in different positions, holding each other in a way they clearly hadn't intended, mid-motion, towards something that was no longer in front of them. A tray was moving at an angle inconsistent with the direction it had been traveling. Something hot was in Peter's hand, which he was drinking, while walking back toward us, with an expression of focused completion. He handed me a set of keys. "Third door on the left," he said. "He's conscious. He's been watching the ceiling for a while. I think he's bored." The man in the cell was not the Eric I knew from the monastery. He was in his 40s, which for Eric meant he was at the peak of whatever it was that Eric was at the peak of. Contained power, strategic intelligence, the hard knowledge of someone who has survived things that didn't intend for him to survive. The cell had been built to specifications that removed every option except patience. He'd been patient. He looked up when I opened the door, and his expression cycled through several things very quickly. Assessment, recognition of unfamiliarity, calculation. "Are you?" he said. "Not a question, a test." "Someone Charles trusts," I said. "That's enough for now. Can you walk?" "I've been sitting in a cell for 10 years, Eric said. "Walking is something I'm very much looking forward to." We got him out, the 4 of us in the vehicle heading north, which was a more interesting configuration than I'd anticipated. Peter, eating something he'd apparently acquired during the extraction, without anyone's notice, Hank monitoring his instruments, Charles and Eric occupying the back seat, in the particular charged proximity of people with deep and complicated history. They didn't say much at first. They said, eventually, was not much, but was sufficient. Acknowledgement on both sides that this was real, that the stakes were what I'd said they were, and that for the moment that commonality was enough to build on. The lead on Raven put her in Paris. There was an international defense conference. Weapons manufacturers, military procurement officers, government liaisons, and Trask was presenting. She'd tracked him there. The timing was tight. We had a plane, which Hank flew, and whatever sleep we got was on the aircraft. I'll tell you about Paris the way it actually happened, which is to say badly. We were not late in the cinematic sense. We arrived before the assassination attempt, before the trigger was pulled. But we were not positioned correctly, and Raven was better at being invisible than anyone we'd anticipated, which in retrospect was obvious, given her gift, and I should have anticipated it better. She moved through that building like water. By the time we identified her position and moved to intercept, she'd already gotten close enough to Trask that the situation had changed. She stopped herself. I want to be accurate about this. She had him in her sights, in his natural form, and something stayed her hand at the last moment. Some calculation, or some remnant of who she'd been before the anger had calcified into a fixed intention. She hesitated. In that hesitation she was seen. Natural form, distinctive, unmistakably non-human to anyone who knew what they were looking at, was recorded. The photograph existed. The information was already moving. We were in the lobby when the alarms went off. We were in the stairwell when Eric made his decision. I don't know exactly what he told himself in the moment. I know the logic of it, because the logic was very Eric. Control the variable, eliminate the uncertainty. Raven alive and at large was a risk he couldn't quantify. Raven captured was the specific thing we'd come to prevent. So Raven had to be stopped in a way that removed both possibilities. He put a piece of metal through her leg. Mortal, precise, incapacitating. She went down in a service corridor, in her own form, caught before she could shift away. No, Charles said. Flat, without qualification. It's the only option, Eric said. If she's in their hands, she's not in their hands yet. Charles moved toward her, and she won't be if you stop making decisions for everyone. There was a moment when Eric could have prevented it. Didn't. Whether that was doubt or the beginning of something more complicated in him, I've never been certain. He stepped back. Charles reached Raven. She looked up at him with pain in her face and something else. Recognition, old history, the complicated grief of two people who had known each other since they were young enough that the knowing went bone deep. Charles spoke to her quietly, in the way he spoke when he was being most himself. Without performance, without the authority of the role, just one person and another. She let him help her. We got out of Paris. Came with us, limping, furious. And also, I saw it in the way she held herself in the aircraft, the way her anger kept cresting and then subsiding, uncertain. Charles had planted something not in the invasive way, not the ability used as a tool, just words, the truth. And the truth had found something in her that was still listening. The situation in Washington, D.C. was not of our making, but we were responsible for it in an indirect way that bothered me, because things you're indirectly responsible for are in some ways worse than things you directly cause. Eric had been processing Paris since we landed. Eric processing something in silence was never a comfortable condition to be near. He moved through the team with the focused efficiency of a man who has made a decision and is now executing it. And by the time I understood what the decision was, it was already substantially underway. The defense demonstration on the White House grounds. Trask's next-generation Sentinel prototypes. World leaders as audience. Every camera in the country present. A moment designed to announce the program to the world as an established and inevitable fact. Eric had found the machines first. He'd modified them, turned their metal inward, rebuilt their architecture with his hands in the time between our arrival and the demonstration, working with the focused concentration of someone who understands machinery at the atomic level. And then he'd gone to the stadium, the sports stadium, half a mile away, 60,000 tons of steel and reinforced concrete. He'd lifted it, moved it, set it around the White House grounds like a wall. His terms, his statement. I was on the grounds when I understood what was happening, and I was running toward him when I took the rebar. One of the modified Sentinels, responding to his commands unpredictably, caught me from behind, and the impact drove a length of structural steel through my spine at the thoracic level. I went down. I have been in the vicinity of serious spinal damage before. The body's reaction to it is unambiguous. I was on the grass, unable to move anything below the impact point. Healing starting immediately, but working against the clock, because there was still metal in the wound, and healing around metal is a slower process than healing around air. I lay there and watched. Charles reached Eric. I couldn't hear everything they said. The distance was wrong, and the sounds around me were too loud. The crowd noise, the machine's repositioning, the particular dissonant chaos of a situation that has gone somewhere nobody intended. I could see them, and I could see what passed between them. And it was the conversation they'd been having for 20 years conducted at a speed and intensity that the situation demanded. Charles asking him to stop. Eric explaining why he couldn't. Why control was necessary. Why leaving this in human hands was a mistake that history had already proven. Charles saying that history was not finished. Eric saying that he knew exactly how it finished and was trying to change the ending. Charles saying, so was he. Eric had Raven's location. He'd tracked her into the crowd, knew she was there, knew she was close enough to Trask that the variable he'd tried to eliminate in Paris was still in play. He moved to intercept her himself. The machines moved with him, his armada, his architecture of control playing out in front of every camera on the grounds. I was getting my feeling back. It starts in the extremities for me. When the healing is working on the spine, a pins and needles quality that would be unbearable if I weren't used to it, working inward. I could move my hands, then my arms. I pushed myself up to my elbows. The rebar was still in me, and pulled it out, which is not an experience I recommend, and the wound began to close behind it. I got to my feet, approximately 2 minutes before the moment that mattered. I was moving across the grass toward the center of the grounds, still not fully functional when I saw Raven. She was in her natural form. She had been, apparently, for several minutes. There was something past the point of hiding in her stance. A willingness to be seen that I recognized as a decision rather than an exposure. She had a gun. She had it pointed at Trask. She had every reason she'd ever carried with her to pull the trigger, and she was standing still well. Charles found her. Not physically. He was on the other side of the grounds, visible to me, not moving. He found her the way he finds people. Across the noise and the chaos and the electrical storm of what a crowd feels, he reached her. And whatever he said, whatever passed between them in the register that doesn't use words, was enough. She lowered the gun. She didn't lower it all the way immediately. She lowered it by degrees, the way you lower something you've been holding up for a long time, and your arms are failing. Not surrender, but the exhaustion of holding a position longer than a body can maintain it. Trask was 3 feet from her. The cameras were running. The world leaders were watching from wherever they'd been evacuated to. Every federal agent on the grounds had her in their field of vision, and she chose. She chose in public. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about it. She could have made a different choice. The violent one, the one with the specific and final kind of relief built into it, in front of every camera in the country, and instead she chose mercy. Demonstrably, visibly, with no question about what she was. A mutant, on the White House lawn, in her own skin, choosing to put the gun down. I was watching her face when she did it. I've seen a lot of faces at the moment of decision. Hers was not blank, and it was not peaceful. It was the face of someone carrying everything at once. The anger, the grief, the 50 years of her people being hunted, the specific and personal costs of what she'd given up to get to this point. Carrying all of it and choosing anyway. That's what made it matter. It wasn't cost-free, it was chosen at cost. The cameras caught it. I don't know who first understood what it meant, in terms of the political and institutional cascade that followed. Trask's program was indefensible now. The justification for it, that mutants were categorically, irredeemably dangerous, had been refuted on live television by the person it most needed to be refuted by. She had saved Trask's life. She had lowered the gun. There was no argument available to the people who'd been building the Sentinels for 50 years that survived contact with that image. Trask was arrested. There were existing charges, it turned out. He'd been selling classified information, biological research data, to foreign governments, and the case for it had been waiting for someone with the authority and motivation to bring it. The arrest happened within the hour. The program's government backing evaporated in the days that followed. There was no announcement. There was just a slow withdrawal of the things that had been supporting it, and the thing itself collapsing into itself without the support. In the future, the Sentinels stopped converging. Kate's connection reached me, even at that distance. Through the ground and the years and whatever mechanism she used that I'd never fully understood, I felt it. Pressure that had been building in the future. The sense of closing that I'd carried with me, even in 1973, lifted. Gradually, all at once. Like a sound you'd stopped noticing because it had been present so long. And then it stopped, and the silence was enormous. She let go of me. The transit back was nothing like the transit forward. 50 years of distance collapsed to zero in less than a second. And what I felt was less like disassembly, and more like coming awake very suddenly, in a place that was exactly where you'd expected to be. I gasped. The ceiling of the school, the real one, the functional one, the one with good light, and the sounds of an occupied building coming through the walls, was above me. I was on a cot in the medical wing. My hands were at my sides. My heart was going fast. I sat up. The room was empty. Through the window, Afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does. Nothing particularly remarkable, just being present and unremarkable and good. I got up. The hallways of the school were full of the ordinary noise of the thing running, students moving between classes, conversations overlapping, the particular acoustic signature of a building that houses a large number of people who are busy and alive. I walked through it slowly, in no hurry. I had been in a hurry for what felt like a long time. Jean was in the corridor outside the library. She was carrying books and talking to someone, and she looked up when I turned the corner and gave me a brief, polite smile. The smile you give someone you don't know particularly well, but have seen around, and continued walking. I stopped and watched her go, and stood there for a moment that was longer than it should have been. She was alive, and she was busy, and she had no idea what she represented to me, and I was not going to tell her. And that was correct. Scott was in the garden. He had his glasses on, and a mug in his hand, and the specific expression of someone who has been out of a building for 10 minutes and is slightly reluctant to go back in. He nodded at me. I nodded back. I found Charles in his study. The good study, the one with lived-in warmth, books that had been opened and returned and had their spines broken by regular use. Afternoon light coming in through windows that were cleaned periodically by someone who cared whether they were clean. He looked up when I came in. "You're up," he said. "Yeah." He looked at me for a moment with the evaluative care of someone taking a real reading, not just a social one. "How do you feel?" "Strange," I said, in a manageable way. "Sit down." I sat. He waited, which was a thing the older Charles had gotten very good at. The patience of someone who understands that some things come out at their own pace and can't be hurried without damage. "Do you remember any of it?" I asked. "Some," he said. "Impressions. The quality of certain conversations. Without the specific content. Feeling of something that needed doing that was done." A pause. "You look like someone who remembers everything." "Always have," I said. "Long life, no gaps." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like a complicated kind of gift." "Most gifts are complicated," I said. We sat in the late afternoon light for a while without particular urgency. Besides, the school continued doing what schools do. I could hear the distant sound of something landing on the athletic field. Aircraft, or someone with a gift that interacted interestingly with gravity, and voices rising in response. The casual amazement of people who live with the remarkable every day and still find it worth noting. "What was it like?" Charles asked eventually. "The other version." "Bad," I said, not elaborating. He didn't push. "Over," he said. "Over," I agreed. He picked up a folder from his desk and opened it. Student files. Academic assessments. The administrative machinery of a functioning institution. He was returning to it the way a person returns to work after a long interruption, with the practical engagement of someone who has things to do and is glad to have things to do. I stood up to go. "Logan," he said without looking up. I stopped. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, stated plainly. Formed. I didn't say anything for a moment. What I wanted to say was complicated, and most of it was not mine to give voice to. It belonged to Kate and Bobby and Bishop and all the others. To 12 people in a monastery making an impossible decision at the end of everything. To Raven on the White House lawn in her own skin with a gun she chose not to fire. I was just the delivery mechanism. I'd done what I was sent to do and come back, which was the job. "Thank me yet," I said. "See how the next 50 years go," he smiled. It was the smile I recognized. The one that knows things are never entirely fixed, that history's never entirely settled, that the work is never done. But also, underneath that, something that might have been peace. Provisional, hard won, aware of its own precariousness, but there. I left him to it and walked back out into the building. The afternoon was ordinary. The school was full. Whatever the other version of the future had been, burned, silenced, the last 12 people making the last possible gamble. It was somewhere that no longer existed. It had been unmade by a woman's choice, and an old man's willingness to feel things again, and a boy in a silver jacket eating cereal in a government hallway. It had been unmade because enough people, at the right moment, decided it didn't have to be that way. I've been alive a long time. I've known a lot of ways things could have gone. The thing about carrying all those could have beens in your memory across decades that other people don't get to keep is that you develop a particular kind of gratitude for the ones that didn't happen, the futures that got unmade, for the moments where the sum of what people chose was different enough from what they might have chosen that the whole thing landed somewhere better. This one landed somewhere better. That's enough. One day, for one mission, for one impossibly long life accumulating weight and faces and the knowledge of what things cost. That's enough. The school was full. The afternoon was ordinary. That's enough. I've thought about Peter a lot over the years. Not obsessively. I don't obsess exactly, because obsession requires a kind of sustained narrowness that my mind doesn't sustain well. He comes back to me. The kid in the silver jacket, eating cereal faster than the spoon could technically accommodate, watching us with that combination of wariness and barely suppressed enthusiasm that I would have found annoying in almost anyone else, and found, in him, genuinely endearing. He didn't know why we needed him. Not fully. I gave him the operational parameters and he accepted them with the pragmatic non-curiosity of someone who has lived his whole life being the most useful person in any room, and has made peace with the fact that useful people don't always get explanations. He came because we asked. He came because the thing we were asking about clearly mattered, even if the full scope of why it mattered was beyond what I could tell him in a suburban kitchen in 1973. What he did in that corridor was not just fast. I want to be accurate about this because the word fast doesn't cover it. A machine is fast. A bullet is fast. Peter had intention behind the speed. He was reading the situation as he moved through it, adjusting, making small decisions at intervals too brief for any normal mind to process. The guards weren't hurt. They were repositioned. The bullet was redirected, not stopped, because you can't stop physics, but given a slight angular correction that put it somewhere other than where it had been aimed. A cup of something that had been falling was no longer falling. He'd made 30 decisions in the time it takes to blink, and every one of them had been the right decision. He was 17 years old. I've been alive long enough to know that what a person does when no one is watching, or when everyone is watching, and it's genuinely dangerous, tells you more about them than anything they say about themselves. Peter did in that corridor when it mattered, when the stakes were real and the margin for error was zero. That told me something. I filed it away the way I file things that matter, which is carefully. He didn't come to Washington with us afterward. His part was done, and he knew it without being told, which was another mark in his favor. Some people with his kind of capability have trouble recognizing the edges of their role. He shook my hand with the studied casualness of someone trying not to seem like he cared whether we thought well of him, and I said something I don't usually say, which was that he'd done good work. He tried very hard not to look pleased. I thought about him on the plane to Paris. I thought about what it must be like to move through a world that operates at roughly a 1/10 your natural speed, to have the experience every day of being faster than consequence itself, faster than a decision and its result, faster than cause and effect, faster than the interval between someone's intention and its execution, to live in a world where you could, theoretically, insert yourself between any action and its outcome. What that does to a person, what it means to be that capable, and that young and that alone with it. He had a father he didn't know. That came up in a way that wasn't quite direct. A comment, a pause, a thing said sideways. I registered it and left it alone. It wasn't mine to address, but I thought about it on the plane, because I was thinking about what we carry, what we're given, versus what we're left to figure out. And Peter had been given something extraordinary and left, largely, to figure out what it meant in a kitchen in suburban Washington. Things people do with what they're given, without instruction. That's the whole subject, isn't it? That's what I'd spent 50 years, watching in two timelines, the same fundamental question asked in two different registers. Do you do with what you are? What do you do with the ability, the history, the particular shape of damage and capability that you were born into or arrived at? Do you use it to control the outcome because you're afraid of what happens if you don't? Do you use it to destroy the thing that's been destroying you because destruction feels like agency? Or do you find some harder, less obvious answer? The one that doesn't have a name yet, the one you have to earn by going through the situation rather than around it. Raven had that question her whole life. She'd been given a body that the world found threatening, an ability that made her useful to people who wanted to use her, and a series of experiences that had systematically demonstrated that the world was not safe for her. She'd arrived at an answer: controlled violence, directed at the source. It was not an irrational answer. Given the information she had, given the experiences she'd accumulated, it was almost the logical answer. The only thing wrong with it was that it was wrong, that the mechanism of her response, whatever justice was in it, would produce something worse than what she was trying to prevent. Charles understood that and communicated it to her, and she heard it. That is the part of the story that I find myself returning to most often, the part that carries the most weight when I turn it over. She heard him. In the middle of everything. In the middle of her own certainty and her mission and the legitimate grievance she'd been carrying for years. She heard him. She let the argument in. She let herself be changed by it. That is rarer than any ability, rarer than speed or strength, or the capacity to reshape metal or reach into someone's mind. The willingness to be changed by the truth when you could choose not to be. The willingness to lower the gun. Charles, the 1973 version, had to do his own version of that. He had to stop managing the pain and let the world back in. The medication was a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. His ability, fully open, would have been genuinely incapacitating in that state. The voices of every mind in range and undifferentiated flood. The solution was not wrong. It had just become something more than a solution. It had become a reason not to need anything, not to be needed, not to participate in the ongoing argument about what the world should be. The argument had been happening without him while he sat in the quiet. I don't have a gift like his. My gift is blunter, more physical. The body's refusal to stay damaged, the bones that knit and the wounds that close, and the endurance that has outlasted situations that should have been final. I've never had access to the interior experience of other people, never felt the particular weight and complexity of what it's like inside someone else's mind. But I've been doing this long enough that I've learned to read what people carry, in the way they hold themselves, the way they pause, the way they decide. Charles was carrying, in that empty house in 1973, was not grief and not failure exactly. It was the specific weight of someone who had built their life around a belief that he was no longer sure was true. The belief that people, given the right conditions, given the right understanding of each other, could choose to coexist, choose not to be afraid of what was different, could be, in the end, better than the worst version of themselves. The Sentinels argued against that. 50 years of a machine built by human hands to solve a human fear, solving it by extermination, that argued against it. It's hard to believe in the best version of humanity when you're looking at the worst. I told him, in that dark room, that the people I'd come from were worth savoring, and I believed it. I believed it because I'd watched them in that monastery, 12 people at the end of everything. And what I'd seen was not despair. What I'd seen was 12 people making the best possible decision under the worst possible conditions. Not because they thought it would work, not because they were confident, but because it was the right thing to do and there was still time to do it. That's a human thing. I don't know any machine that can do that. Eric, in his own way, was trying to do the same thing. His method was wrong, catastrophically wrong, in Paris and in Washington. But the motivation underneath it was the same one that drove everyone else in the story. He was trying to prevent the worst outcome. He was just doing it in the only way he'd ever learned to do anything. With complete control, with no tolerance for uncertainty. With the iron conviction that leaving things to chance was a luxury that his history had removed from him. You can't fully separate Eric from what made him. Tried, over the years, to hold him at the distance of pure assessment, to look at his choices without reference to what preceded them. And I can't do it cleanly. I can see the choices clearly. I can see when they were wrong. I can also see what the choices came from. The bedrock of experience that had taught him that the world could be taken from you faster than you could react. That the only real protection was control. That mercy was a word used by the powerful to keep the powerless in place. He wasn't wrong about all of it. He was wrong about enough of it that the conclusions he reached were regularly catastrophic. The Paris decision. the Washington Stadium. Both were the actions of someone who had found what he thought was the short path to the safe outcome, and had taken it without full accounting of what it would cost. Charles, I think, never stopped believing that there was another version of Eric available. Not the version the world made, the one hardened into certainty, armored against doubt, but the version underneath that, the one who had been a child before he was a weapon, the one who had, once in some earlier chapter, chosen to trust someone. That's its own kind of stubbornness. Refusal to stop believing in someone. I've known it in a handful of people over the long years, and it looks from the outside sometimes like naivety. It's not naivety, or not only naivety. It's also a kind of precision, the ability to see, through everything, what's underneath. By the time we were leaving Washington, Eric had stood back. He'd done the stadium, done the machines, done the thing that was definitively the wrong move on the world's largest stage. And then, when Charles reached him, something had given, completely, not the full conversion to a different life, but enough. He'd stepped back. He hadn't prevented Raven from choosing. That's the most I expected, and also, somehow, more than I expected. The version of Eric I knew from the future was older and grimmer, and had spent 50 years watching the worst consequences of human fear play out. He'd arrived at something like pragmatic alliance with Charles, a shared purpose born of shared survival, but it had always carried the weight of what they'd been to each other and done to each other over decades. The 1973 version was not that yet. He was still at the point in the story before the hardening was complete. Whether the choice he made in Washington was the first brick taken out of the wall, I don't know. I'm not built for that kind of speculation. But I think about it. There's a version of bravery that looks like what Raven did. Standing in the open, in your own skin, with the cameras running and every reason to do the violent thing, and choosing something else. That version is visible. It gets remembered. There's another version that doesn't look like anything from the outside. The version where someone like Charles opens himself up to the voices again after 2 years of careful silence. Where someone stops managing the pain and decides to feel the world. Because the world needs to be felt, and there's no way to help it from inside the anesthetic. Someone agrees, at the end of the worst moment of their life, to try again. That version is quieter. It doesn't read well in a summary. But it's the hinge everything else turns on. I've been alive a long time, and the thing I've learned, the one thing I'd offer if anyone asked, which most people don't, is that the moments that determine everything are almost never the ones that look decisive from the outside. They're not the final stand, not the dramatic refusal, not the gun lowered in front of the cameras. Those are the results. The moments that determine everything are earlier, smaller, more interior. A man in a dark room deciding whether to let the voices back in. A woman on a staircase deciding whether she's already finished or not. A boy in a kitchen deciding to use what he is for something other than himself. Everything else follows from those moments. The school was full. The afternoon was ordinary. Walked the halls for a while after leaving Charles, not going anywhere in particular. Just moving through it. There's a value to that I've learned over the years. The value of being present in a place without an agenda. Letting the place be what it is, rather than what you need it to be. The building was loud and warm and imperfect, in the way that any building full of young people is imperfect, scuffed and busy, and slightly in need of repairs that will happen when someone has time. Girl I didn't know ran past me in the corridor, laughing at something someone behind her had said. She didn't see me. I stepped aside and let her pass and watched her go around the corner and disappear. That's all. That was the whole thing. A girl running, laughing, in a school that was full, on an ordinary afternoon, in a future that someone had decided was worth fighting for. I stood in the corridor for another moment. Then I went to find something to eat, because I'd been somewhere else for a long time and I was back now, and being back meant the ordinary things again. Hunger, and the afternoon light, and what comes next. That's enough. That's the whole job. It's enough.